The Forgotten Prince of Windsor. Prince John Charles Francis was born on the 12th of July 1905 at York Cottage on the Sandringham Estate. He was the fifth son and youngest of 6 children born to King George V and his wife, Queen Mary. He would have been the uncle to Queen Elizabeth II if he had lived. At only 4 years of age, he was diagnosed with a condition, in his case that was life-limiting, called epilepsy. His diagnosis was kept a secret from the public, and he was sent away to be looked after by his governess in Sandringham House until his death at a young age of 13. There was little known of the prince at the time, and his diagnosis and whole existence after this was kept secret from the public. For the first 4 years of his life, his diagnosis was unknown. There were no signs of epilepsy. He was deemed a very healthy young boy who had a bright and vibrant personality, and he loved to play practical jokes on his family. He once put glue onto door handles and famously called his father an ugly old man. Prince John was part of an unbelievable and powerful dynasty. His grandfather was King Edward VII during a time when the empire was at its most powerful. He was also related to 20 reigning monarchs throughout history. But despite the extravagant power and wealth, surprisingly, John and his siblings did not always have an easy time. His father, the future King George V, was extremely strict, and he expected his children to behave like adults rather than juvenile children, and this put a strain on their childhood experiences. George had once retorted that he was frightened of his father, and that he would make damn sure his children are frightened of him. Although his parents loved each other profoundly, they did not believe in public affection, and this even extended into the family home. Affection was suppressed between the pair, and so expressing emotion became alien to the siblings. Their parents only showed their love for each other through letters. The relationship with their mother was detached. They only spent an hour a day with her, and although they barely saw their father, it was evident that he was the bully of the household. Although privileged with great wealth, George insisted that they live in a smaller York cottage, and so the family, alongside their servants, nannies and governesses, were crammed into one small home together. The atmosphere was tense, and an underlying air of fear underpinned the children's childhood. Their father had a nasty temper, and they really were quite fearful of him. He set his standards unachievably high. He expected his children to dress and behave seamlessly as a member of the royal family, and future kings should. Prince Edward recalled how his childhood was wretched, but despite all of this, little John was unfazed. He was not afraid of his father, and he was quite rebellious against his bullish standards. All children suffered, but only John was eventually removed from the home. At only aged 4, John began having seizures, and his diagnosis of epilepsy was given when he became winsome and painfully slow. It is alleged that he showed signs of autism as well. During this time, John's father was the Prince of Wales and heir to the United Kingdom's throne. In 1910, the Prince of Wales succeeded to the throne after Edward VII's death, making John 5th in line of succession to the British throne. He was allowed to make a brief public appearance on the balcony outside Marlborough House during the funeral procession of Edward VII. During World War I, John saw less of his parents as they were often away on official duties. His siblings were either at boarding school or in the military, and John slowly began to disappear from the public eye, and no official portraits of him were commissioned after 1913. At this point, despite his health issues, John was not removed from the line of succession. Not much was known of epilepsy at the time, and the royal doctors would have been inexperienced with treating the condition, so there was no treatment for it at all. It was even deemed to be a symptom of insanity, and perhaps this is why Prince John was hidden away for most of his life. 3 years later, in 1916, his seizures became more frequent, and much more severe, and this is when he was sent to live at Wood Farm, a farmhouse on the Sandringham Estate, with his governess and nanny Charlotte Bill. She was known as Lala by the children, and she was much loved dearly by John, and she had nursed them since babies. John's seizures continued to intensify. Lala Bill wrote, "We dared not let him be with his brothers and sisters because it upsets them so much, with the attacks getting so bad and coming so often." He spent Christmas Day 1918 with his family at Sandringham, and was driven back to Wood Farm that night. Not long afterwards, on the 18th of January 1919, at the young age of 13, John died from a severe seizure in his sleep. Doctors had told the King and Queen that John wouldn't survive to adulthood, but this admission didn't mean that his mother was not shocked by his death in 1919. She wrote in her diary that it was a great shock, but that his death was a great relief. The pair visited John at Wood Farm after his death, where they saw his body lying peacefully still. George described his son's death as the greatest mercy possible, perhaps believing he would no longer suffer. The public were unaware why Prince John had been removed from public life. This sparked rumours that he was being mistreated or cast aside out of embarrassment, but the public were notified of his condition only after his death in the Daily Mirror newspaper. In the years that followed, the young prince was omitted from local newspapers. and from the Windsor family tree. Some believe he was written out of history because he wasn't quite up to scratch, and it is easy to forget the child that died in his teenage years. Not only was John hidden away, but he was barely mentioned at all after his death. It was not until 1998, more than 80 years later, that a photo album was found in an attic in Paris that showed John as a little boy enjoying life with friends that were allowed to visit. He was written out of history, but for what motivation is unknown. Were they embarrassed due to a condition that deemed him insane, or was their grief too hard to deal with, so it was easier for his existence to just disappear?
Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.